The papers landed face down on the tablecloth her mother had ironed on the last Sunday before the hospital admitted her. Royce Chartrand, 43-year-old husband of Willa and the newly appointed senior design director of North Haven Properties, placed the envelope on the linen cloth with a deliberateness that told Willa he had thought about this moment long enough to choreograph it. He said he had waited. He said he respected her loss. He said that he could not hold his life in suspension any longer while she moved through her grief at the pace grief required of her. Then Camille Beaufort, 32-year-old interior designer and Royce's primary project collaborator on the Meridian Tower development, stepped through the door behind him, and Willa understood that the word patience had meant something very different to Royce than she had imagined. Willa Soren Chartrand, 37-year-old wife of Royce and the woman the public registry of North Haven Properties had never once named, stood in the kitchen doorway still wearing her mother's cardigan. It was yellow and slightly too large and smelled of the hand cream Brigitte had ordered from a small pharmacy in Westmount every year for as long as Willa could remember. The memorial reception had ended 3 hours ago. The house still held the warmth of too many people and the scent of the white chrysanthemums Zinnia had arranged near the front hall. Zinnia Tremblay, 38-year-old closest friend of Willa, and the woman who had said, 2 years ago, that she didn't like the way Royce stopped listening in the middle of sentences. Zinnia rose from the couch the moment she registered who had walked in behind him. Her face went hard. She said nothing. She moved to stand closer to Willa instead. Camille did not remove her coat. That told Willa this visit was not meant to be long. "You chose today," Willa said. "Not a question." Royce said the timing wasn't ideal, but there was never a perfect time. He said staying longer would only prolong something that had already ended for him. He said Willa had always been suited to quieter rooms than the ones he was being invited into now, and he needed someone beside him at the Meridian Award Gala who fit the version of himself he had spent the last 6 years building. He picked up the envelope and held it out. Zinnia stepped forward. Willa placed one hand on Zinnia's arm gently and took the envelope herself. She looked at it, then at Camille, then at the tablecloth her mother had bought in Montreal on their last trip together, the one with the small embroidered border that Brigitte had called an indulgence, and Willa had called exactly right. "You chose today," she said again, quieter. She walked to the front door and opened it. Neither Royce nor Camille spoke. After a moment they left. The October air came in from the street, cold, carrying the smell of wet leaves and the particular grey damp that settled over Oakville in mid-autumn like a second sky. Willa closed the door. She stood with her back against it, the envelope still in both hands, and did not move for a long time. What Royce Chartrand did not know, what he had never taken the time to learn, because Willa's quietness had always looked to him like the absence of significance, was that the woman in her mother's yellow cardigan was the controlling majority shareholder of North Haven Properties, through Hartmore Holdings, the private trust her parents had built over 30 years and placed entirely under Willa's authority 18 months before Edouard Soren's death. Royce had been working for his wife since the day he signed his employment contract. He had shaken hands with men who deferred to Hester Bain. He had submitted budget proposals that went, ultimately, across Aldrich Beaumont's desk. He had walked through job sites on land that Hartmore Holdings controlled and believed, because no one corrected him and because he had never asked, that his position there was the result of his own talent arriving in the right city at the right time. He had told Willa once, over dinner, that he understood how power actually worked. She had passed him the breadbasket and said nothing. Willa's parents had founded North Haven Properties in Calgary in 1989. Edouard Soren, structural engineer, and the most stubborn person in any room he entered, and Brigitte Soren, the woman who understood with an accuracy that unnerved contractors and delighted clients. Exactly what a neighborhood needed before the neighborhood knew itself. They had built the company the slow way, one project at a time, no investors they didn't trust, no partners who hadn't been watched through at least one difficult situation first. By the time they relocated the head office to Oakville, North Haven's portfolio had crossed $100 million in value, and the name meant something across the province. Willa had grown up inside the company the way some children grow up inside family farms, not assigned to it, just present for it, absorbing it through proximity until it became part of how she understood the world. She had sat in North Haven boardrooms doing homework. She had walked sites in rubber boots. She had watched her father hold his position against men twice his age who believed a French-Canadian engineer from a working family didn't belong at the negotiating table. She had watched her mother take those same men to lunch afterward and make them grateful for it. When Willa was 22, Edouard had shown her the Hartmore Holdings trust structure for the first time. They were in the original Calgary office, the one with the low ceilings and the coffee machine nobody outside the family knew how to operate. He had placed a document in her hands and waited for her to read it before he spoke. "The people who know what you're worth," he said, "start calculating what they can access before the handshake is over. Don't make it easy for them." She hadn't. Her access badge at North Haven said Heritage Liaison. People who saw her in the building assumed she helped with legacy documentation, community partnerships, archive work. Some of them thanked her for parking validation. Only Hester Bain, 54-year-old chief financial officer, and the woman who had held North Haven's finances steady through 2 near misses and 1 genuinely catastrophic interest rate year, knew the full picture. Only Aldrich Beaumont, 63-year-old family solicitor and executor of the Hartmore Trust, could speak to the precise legal structure. Only Corwin Slate, 44-year-old director of compliance and security, had been trusted with the access architecture that protected Willa's identity inside her own company. Royce had signed a matrimonial agreement before their wedding acknowledging that all Sorin family trust assets remained legally separate. He had been advised to retain independent counsel. He had not bothered. He had assumed the assets were modest, some old property holdings, some inherited sentiment, and signed without reviewing the attached schedules. He had assumed because Willa had let him assume, because her parents had taught her that wolves smile widest near open gates. Brigitte was in the ICU at Halton Healthcare for 9 days before she died. Willa spent most of those 9 days at the hospital. She slept poorly in a chair not designed for sleeping. She ate from the vending machine on the 3rd floor and called Aldrich twice a day and called Royce in the evenings and tried not to count how many times he asked about the Meridian Project timeline before asking how her mother was doing. On the 5th day, she sent him a message. The doctor asked if close family should be nearby. "Can you come tonight?" He came the following afternoon for 40 minutes. He checked his phone twice during those 40 minutes. He told Willa she looked like she hadn't slept. She sent one more message on the 7th day. "I need you here. Please come." He replied that the Meridian Review Board had moved their site visit to that same week, and it wasn't something he could reschedule. Brigitte died at 4:52 in the morning on the 9th day. The nurse on duty held Brigitte's other hand because Willa could not hold both. Willa called Royce from the hospital parking structure. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sat in the car and watched the morning come up over the escarpment, that slow, reluctant October light, and then she called Zinnia. Corwin called the night of the memorial reception after the door had closed and the chrysanthemum smell had gone flat in the empty rooms. "I'm sorry to call tonight," he said. "I wouldn't unless I thought it mattered." "Tell me," Willa said. Expense records tied to the Meridian project. Camille Beaufort's vendor account has been drawing against Royce's director budget for 14 months. Hotel accommodation, design studio fees, a private travel account, all routed under project development, approved without secondary review because Dex Pallant, the marketing director Royce personally hired 8 months ago, has been sitting in the secondary approval queue. Willa was quiet for a moment. What else? A pause. There's a name in the original Meridian design file archive, Jasper Okafor. "I need you to come in when you're ready. I think you need to see this in person before I can explain it properly." Jasper Okafor, 27-year-old independent architect and recent graduate of the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Architecture, sat across from Willa in a quiet North Haven boardroom with a portfolio case open on the table between them and the careful expression of someone who has been made, more than once, to feel that his presence in a room requires justification. He was from Winnipeg originally. He had moved to Toronto 18 months ago, on the strength of North Haven's open design submission call, and on the strength of a personal email from Royce Chartrand that called Jasper's concept the most genuinely original thinking we've received in this round. Jasper opened the portfolio case. The drawings were dated 23 months earlier, a mixed-use residential tower concept for Toronto's East End, designed around the curvature of the Don River Valley. A central courtyard, modeled on traditional Anishinaabe community gathering principles. Green terracing structured by indigenous land stewardship logic rather than standard engineering calculus. A building that was meant to remember what the land had been before the concrete arrived. "He said he wanted to mentor me," Jasper said. His hands were flat on the table. "He said if I trusted him with the concept, he could get it in front of the people who had the authority to develop it properly." He said people like me needed someone to hold the door. After the first 3 months, the invitations to meetings became infrequent. After 5 months, Jasper's studio access had been quietly reduced. After 8 months, Dex Pallant had called him to say the Meridian concept was pivoting in a new direction and his contribution would be recognized with a minor research credit in the final package. Jasper had seen the Meridian Tower announcement 6 months later in Canadian Architect magazine. The community courtyard had been redesigned. The indigenous land stewardship logic that had been the structural heart of the original concept had been reduced to a single paragraph in the media release. But the bones were his. Anyone who had seen the original drawings would recognize them. I stopped fighting, Jasper said. He was looking at the table. I thought people like him always get to decide what happened. Willa looked at the drawings. She looked at the dates. She thought about her mother, standing in a hallway 30 years ago between a studio lawyer and a young filmmaker whose script had just been purchased for a fraction of its value, kneeling down to the filmmaker's level and telling her that no one was leaving the room until the terms were honest. People like him get to decide, Willa said carefully, when there's no one guarding the door. She placed her hand at the edge of his portfolio. My mother would have wanted this corrected. Jasper looked up. He didn't know yet what that meant. He would. Aldrich spread the legal options across the conference table that evening like a man laying a foundation, methodically, in the right order, with attention to what each piece needed to bear. Hester confirmed the expense irregularities. 14 months, $46,000 across hotel accommodation, vendor fees, and a travel account that had never been flagged because Dex had positioned himself precisely in the approval gap between Royce's budget and the CFO's quarterly review. Corwin pulled the access logs, restricted project files accessed from Royce credentials at hours outside his approved scope. Camille's visitor pass, upgraded by Dex from day access to full building clearance on 3 separate occasions. Zinnia sat near the window and said nothing for a long time. Then, he knew exactly what he was doing with every single one of these. Yes, Hester said. Willa looked at the documents. She thought about the envelope on the linen tablecloth, the choreography of it. We don't move until the gala, she said. Aldrich looked up. If we suspend him now, Willa continued, he controls the story. He calls it grief. He calls it a wife who couldn't accept that the marriage was over. He calls it a family trust, punishing a man for having ambition. She looked at the access logs on the screen. But if we wait until the Meridian Award Gala, when the investors are seated, when the press is in the room, when every person he's misled is present, then he can't reframe it. Hester looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite pride, but was close to both. You're letting him walk into the theater. I'm letting him believe he owns the stage, Willa said. There's a difference. No one in the room smiled. None of this felt like victory yet. It felt like doing the right thing in the dark, which is harder and lonelier, and which her parents had always said was the only kind worth doing. The Meridian Tower Award Gala was held in the Distillery District, in the old fermenting cellar repurposed as an event space, exposed brick, high timber ceilings, the kind of venue that said heritage and ambition in the same breath. North Haven Properties was the presenting sponsor. No one in the room, except the people who needed to know, understood what that meant tonight. Royce arrived to a reception that met him warmly. His name was on the program. His photograph was in the digital display cycling on the lobby screens. Dex moved through the crowd ahead of him, positioning, managing, making sure the right journalists had the right quote before the formal proceedings began. Camille stood close and spoke quietly near his shoulder in the way that had stopped being concealed months ago and had become, instead, a declaration. Willa arrived through the venue's secondary entrance with Aldrich, Hester, Corwin, Zinnia, and Jasper. She wore a plain black dress, her mother's earrings, her father's watch under her sleeve. She looked like someone attending a memorial, and in certain ways she was. The lights dimmed. The program host, Rennie Forsyth, 51-year-old architecture journalist and the evening's MC, called the room to order. She spoke about North Haven's history of responsible development, about the Meridian Tower's significance to Toronto's East End, about what it meant to build with community in mind. Then she called Royce Chartrand to the podium. Royce accepted the moment with the ease of a man who had been practicing for it. He spoke about vision. He spoke about the courage it took to build something that mattered. He thanked Camille by name, in a way that no one in the room could politely misread. He said, near the end, that some people understood what ambition cost, and some people were more comfortable in quieter rooms, and that was fine, but it meant that not everyone could walk beside you. into the places you were building toward. The room was warm, the applause was ready. Then the presentation screen, which had been displaying the Meridian Tower's architectural renderings, went dark. 3 seconds of silence. Then the North Haven Properties corporate seal appeared. Not the event branding, not the award graphic, the official legal seal. Royce stopped speaking. The first document hit the screen, an expense authorization from Royce's director account. Camille Beaufort's vendor number. Hotel accommodation, 4 nights in Vancouver, categorized under professional development. The North Haven legal header made it look less like an exposure and more like a correction, because that was exactly what it was. A second document. A third, Dex Pallant's approval signature on each one, time-stamped from the secondary review queue that had been positioned specifically to avoid standard CFO oversight. The room had gone very still. Then the screen changed, a side-by-side comparison. Jasper Okafor's original concept drawings, dated and time-stamped and registered with the Canadian Intellectual Property Office 23 months earlier, placed beside the Meridian Tower's approved design package. The community courtyard, the river-curved glass panels, the land stewardship terracing logic, the bones of the building that had always, from the beginning, been his. Jasper, sitting near the back of the room with Zinnia, looked down at his hands, then slowly he looked up. A senior editor from Canadian Architect turned in her seat and looked at the drawings on the screen, then looked at the program in her hands where Royce Chartrand's name was the only name listed under design direction. Rennie had stepped back from the podium. She looked toward the projection booth with an expression that said she was experienced enough to understand what was happening, and careful enough not to speak until she knew the full shape of it. Royce stepped toward the microphone. "Turn it off," he said. The screen did not respond. A formal North Haven Properties notice appeared. This presentation has been authorized by the company's legal committee, ethics committee, and controlling ownership authority. All documentation shown has been preserved under legal hold. The following actions are effective immediately. Then the names. Royce Chartrand, executive suspension pending investigation into expense misappropriation and design attribution fraud. Dex Pallant, secondary review misconduct and approval queue manipulation. Camille Beaufort, unauthorized billing and vendor account irregularities. The room read the names in silence. Then the room began to talk, not loudly but continuously, the way a current moves when something beneath the surface finally breaks through. Royce's eyes moved across the faces near the aisle. He was looking for something that would tell him who had done this, and whether there was still a version of tonight that went differently. He found Willa. She had stepped out from the shadow near the side wall. She stood at the edge of the room with Aldrich on her left, and Hester behind her and Corwin near the exit. Zinnia stood close. Jasper stood slightly apart, his portfolio case no longer in his hands. Royce crossed the room toward her. The audience watched. "You can't do this," he said low and fast. "You don't have the authority." "The company is North Haven Properties," Willa said quietly. "The controlling trust is Hartmore Holdings. I am the majority shareholder and acting chair." She looked at him steadily. "I have held that authority since before you signed your employment contract." Something moved through Royce's face. Not guilt, he wasn't there yet, and perhaps never would be. Calculation first. Then, beneath the calculation, something she hadn't seen from him in a long time. The specific fear of a person who has built on ground they never actually own. "You never told me," he said. "You never asked who I was," Willa said. "You decided what I was worth and stopped looking." Camille said something, a protest, quickly spoken, and then stopped when she realized the journalists nearest to her had their phones up. Aldrich stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope in Royce's hands. "Your executive access is suspended effective tonight. Outside counsel will contact your solicitor regarding expense recovery, design attribution, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Meridian Tower project is under formal review pending correct attribution and rights correction." Royce held the envelope without seeming to know what to do with his hands. Willa turned away from him. She walked to where Jasper stood. She stood beside him, in front of the screen where his drawings were still displayed, and faced the audience. North Haven Properties was founded on the belief that development should protect voices, not consume them, she said. "Tonight, we are recognizing Jasper Okafor as the originating designer of the Meridian Tower concept. The project will not proceed under false attribution. We will not build on someone else's vision and call it ours." The applause began slowly. A few people in the back rows, then the architects in the center section, then the journalists, then the whole room rising. Not for Royce Chartrand, not out of obligation, but for the young man from Winnipeg who had brought his best idea to people who were supposed to protect it, and for the woman who had just made sure that they would. Jasper stood very still for a moment. Then he pressed one hand briefly over his mouth, the way people do when something has happened that they had stopped believing would happen, and nodded once. Royce left through a side exit before the applause was finished. Dex followed him. Camille moved toward the exit a few minutes later and found two journalists waiting near the door with questions she was not prepared to answer. Venton Greer, 61-year-old board member who had spent the past year quietly maneuvering to challenge the Hartmore Holdings trust structure, sat in the third row and looked at the screen where Willa's title now appeared in the official corporate disclosure and understood, with the particular clarity that comes from being outmaneuvered by someone you had discounted, that his window had closed. Hester walked to where Willa was standing and said, very quietly, "Madam Chair." She said it the way a person says a name they have been keeping safe for a long time and are finally allowed to use out loud. The weeks that followed did not move quickly. Correct things rarely do. The expense recovery case was filed. The design attribution review began. Jasper's name was formally entered into the Meridian Tower record, and a corrected credit package was prepared for submission to the architectural registry. The project's public rollout was paused until the rights framework was clean, until the building, when it finally went up, would be standing on honest ground. Dex resigned before the board vote concluded. Venton Greer withdrew his challenge to the trust structure without explanation, which was explanation enough. Royce called Willa twice in the first week. She let both calls go to voicemail and then called Aldrich to note that he had made contact. She was done making excuses for calls she didn't answer. Jasper's revised contract was signed in a North Haven boardroom on a Tuesday morning in November. His hands were steadier than they had been in the first meeting, but not by much. That was all right. Willa had not expected fearlessness from him. Fearless was easy. What Jasper had was something different. He had shown up knowing the cost and come anyway, and that was the kind of courage that didn't make noise about itself. After the contract signing, Willa sat alone in the private screening room that smelled of cold coffee and recycled air and old decisions. The presentation screen was black. Through the glass wall, the afternoon light over Lake Ontario came in at its low November angle, the kind that didn't reach far but made everything it touched look precise and clean. She touched her mother's earrings, then her father's watch. She had spent 6 years protecting the company by staying invisible inside it. She had protected Royce's career, his budget approvals, his belief that every room he walked into had been made for him. She had done it, but Tosks had taught her the power should meet you before it introduces itself, and because some part of her had still been hoping, long past the reasonable point, that the man she had married would eventually become curious enough to look. He had never looked. She took her phone out and called Zinnia. "It's done," she said. A pause, then Zinnia said, "Are you okay?" "Getting there," Willa said. And she meant it, not as reassurance, but as something true, the way things are true when you stop performing fine for people who haven't earned the performance. Outside, the lake was grey and flat and very wide, the way it was in November, patient, the way deep water is patient, having been sitting in the same place long enough to stop needing to explain itself or justify its depth to anyone who had chosen not to look. Willa stood there for a while and let it be enough. Some betrayals do not break a quiet woman. They only make clear, finally and without argument, what she was protecting all along, and why silence should never be mistaken for surrender. Subscribe for more stories like this, and comment Anchor if you believe that what holds steady in the quiet is always stronger than what performs loudly in the light.